April 1939. Off the coast of South Africa, near the Cape of Good Hope, a group of sunbathers on Glencairn Beach look up from the sand and see something that should not exist. A full-rigged sailing ship, centuries out of date, moving through rough seas under a sky already darkening with storm. Witnesses would later describe in remarkably consistent detail an old-fashioned vessel, sails set as if navigating waters no modern ship would dare enter in that weather. Then, in front of dozens of witnesses, the ship simply vanishes. Not sinks, not sails out of view behind the horizon, disappears mid-ocean in full daylight. The sighting made local newspapers within days. One of the best documented mass sightings of ship that sailors across 3 centuries have sworn they've seen. A vessel doomed to sail forever, crewed by the dead, never permitted to make port. Sailors called it the Flying Dutchman. And for hundreds of years, seeing it was considered a death sentence. This is the story of history's most famous ghost ship. Where the legend came from, why so many experienced, rational sailors across centuries claimed to see it, and what modern science now believes was really moving across the water that day off Cape Town. Introduction. The Flying Dutchman is not simply a myth invented for entertainment. It emerged from a very real and very dangerous chapter of maritime history, the Dutch golden age of trade and exploration, when ships regularly vanished round in the most treacherous cape in the world, and sailors needed some way to explain disasters that science of the era could not. Why did this particular legend outlast almost every other sailor's tale from the age of sail? Why did naval officers, merchant captains, and even a future King of England file official reports describing an impossible ship? And what natural phenomenon, hiding in plain sight for centuries, might finally explain what these witnesses actually saw? Historical background. The legend traces back to the 17th century, the height of Dutch maritime power. The Dutch East India Company, formed in 1602, operated the largest and most sophisticated trading fleet in the world, sailing from Europe to Asia in pursuit of spices, silk, and enormous profit. The route required rounding the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa, a passage notorious even today for violent, unpredictable weather, where the cold Benguela current colliding with warmer Indian Ocean waters produces sudden storms, rogue waves, and dense, disorienting fog. Hundreds of ships were lost attempting this passage during the 1600s and 1700s. Navigation relied on dead reckoning, with no reliable way to calculate longitude until decades later, meaning captains often had only a rough sense of their true position in exactly the waters where precision mattered most. Against this backdrop of routine, unexplained disaster, the story of a captain so reckless, so damned, that he was condemned to sail the Cape forever without rest, gave frightened crews something almost more comforting than mystery, an explanation, even a supernatural one, for the ships that never came home. The most widely repeated version of the legend centers on a Dutch captain named Hendrik van der Decken, though it's worth noting up front that no definitive historical record confirms this man actually existed under this name. The story, as it was told and retold in sailors' taverns and later written down in the early 1800s, describes a captain attempting to round the Cape of Good Hope during a violent storm, refusing to turn back despite his crews pleading and despite warnings from other ships already sheltering in harbor. According to the tale, Van der Decken swore he would round the Cape even if it took him until Judgment Day, and cursed God himself in his arrogance to make the passage. What happened next depends on which version of the story you hear. Some accounts describe him being struck down where he stood. Others describe a ghostly figure appearing on deck to deliver the curse directly. But the punishment in every version is the same. Van der Decken and his crew were condemned to sail the Cape forever, never permitted to make port, never allowed to die, doomed to attempt the same impossible passage for eternity. The earliest known written reference to this specific captain's name appears in an 1821 poem, well over a century after the legend is believed to have originated at sea, suggesting the name itself may have been added later to give an already circulating sailor's superstition a more concrete, dramatic narrative. What the story reflects more broadly, regardless of the captain's true identity, is something sailors of the era understood intimately, that pride and recklessness against the sea's power carried consequences, and that the Cape of Good Hope, more than perhaps any other passage on earth, punished arrogance without mercy. Why sailors believed it was real. To understand why this legend took hold so completely, you have to understand the psychology of 18th and 19th century sailors, men who spent months at sea in genuine, constant danger, with limited scientific explanation for the phenomena they witnessed. Superstition aboard ship was not idle folklore. It was a functional part of how sailors processed risk in an environment where death could arrive without warning, from a wave, a storm, an illness, or a navigational error invisible until it was too late. A ghost ship in this context was not a fantastical addition to sailors' fears. It was a logical extension of them, a way of giving shape to the very real terror of the Cape of Good Hope's reputation for swallowing ships whole. By the mid-1700s, the legend had become so widespread among sailors of multiple nationalities, Dutch, British, and beyond, that sighting the Flying Dutchman was considered a specific, well-understood omen, not of general bad luck, but of a very particular kind of doom. Sailors believed that seeing the ship meant the observing vessel itself was fated to sink, or that some catastrophic misfortune would strike the crew who witnessed it. This belief was strong enough that some captains reportedly altered course or delayed departure after a crew member claimed a sighting, an extraordinary decision given the commercial pressure to maintain shipping schedules. The Royal Sighting of 1881. Perhaps the single most famous documented sighting of the Flying Dutchman did not come from a superstitious common sailor, but from an officer who would later become King George V of the United Kingdom. In July 1881, while serving as a young naval cadet aboard HMS Bacchante, the future king recorded in the ship's log, later published in a book about the royal prince's naval voyages, that a strange, glowing, spectral ship had been sighted off the coast near Australia, visible to multiple crew members simultaneously. The account describes the ship appearing at around 4 a.m, its masts, spars, and sails clearly outlined against the night sky in a strange red glow, visible to 13 people aboard the Bacchante, according to the log, before vanishing without a trace as another ship, sent to investigate, approached the spot. What makes this sighting historically significant is not simply the presence of a future monarch, but the sheer number of independent witnesses recorded in an official naval log, a document meant to serve as a factual record of the voyage rather than folklore. The entry itself, however, comes with a grim postscript that has fueled superstition around the story for well over a century. Shortly after the sighting, the first crew member who spotted the ship reportedly fell from the rigging and died, and the admiral commanding the fleet was said to have taken seriously ill shortly afterward. Whether these events were genuinely connected to the sighting, or simply coincidence retroactively linked to it by superstitious sailors, remains impossible to determine. But the pattern of tragedy following a sighting is one that recurs throughout the legend's history. The science behind the ghost. Modern atmospheric science offers a compelling, evidence-based explanation for many, if not most, historical sightings of the Flying Dutchman, and it centers on a genuine optical phenomenon called a Fata Morgana. A Fata Morgana is a complex form of superior mirage, occurring when layers of air at significantly different temperatures create a natural atmospheric lens, bending light in ways that can make distant objects, including ships genuinely sailing far below the horizon, in reality much farther away or entirely out of normal viewing range, appear distorted, elevated, stretched vertically, or seemingly suspended above the water surface. Unlike a simple mirage, a Fata Morgana can produce startlingly detailed, convincing images that shift and change shape as atmospheric conditions fluctuate, and can make an entirely ordinary ship appear ghostly, elongated, or even inverted. The waters around the Cape of Good Hope, along with certain other regions where cold and warm currents or air masses collide, are known among atmospheric scientists to produce these conditions with some regularity, particularly during specific combinations of temperature inversion. A real ship, perhaps a perfectly ordinary vessel sailing well beyond normal visual range, could under the right atmospheric conditions appear to hover, distort, or seem to vanish suddenly as the temperature layers produced in the mirage shift or dissipate, precisely the kind of disappearance described by the witnesses on Glencairn Beach in 1939. Beyond the famous royal sighting and the 1939 mass witnessing at Glencairn Beach, the historical record contains dozens of smaller, less celebrated accounts scattered across ship's logs, newspaper archives, and personal diaries, fragments of testimony from sailors who had no reason to lie and no audience beyond their own captain and crew. A German ship's log from the 1830s, referenced in later maritime folklore collections, describes a captain recording a sighting near the Cape in language strikingly similar to accounts a century later, a ship under full sail, moving against the wind, vanishing as suddenly as it appeared. British merchant sailors in the 19th century reportedly refused, in several documented cases, to continue voyages after a crew member claimed a sighting, forcing captains to either delay departure or risk mutiny from men who genuinely believed their lives were now forfeit. These were not isolated cranks or drunken storytellers. Many were experienced officers whose professional reputations depended on being taken seriously, men who had every incentive to stay silent about something so easily mocked, and who reported it anyway. What ties these scattered accounts together is not simply the repetition of a good story, but the specific, consistent details, the ghostly light, the archaic rigging, the sudden vanishing, almost always near capes or headlands where warm and cold air masses are most likely to collide. Whether every witness saw a genuine Fata Morgana, a distant real ship distorted by atmospheric conditions, or simply absorbed a well-known legend so thoroughly that fear and expectation shaped what they believed they witnessed, the consistency across centuries and nationalities is itself remarkable and difficult to dismiss as pure invention, the legend that outlived the age of sail. By the time steam power began replacing sail across the 19th century, the Flying Dutchman had already secured a permanent place in maritime culture, far beyond the community of working sailors who first told the story. Richard Wagner's 1843 opera, Der Fliegende Holländer, brought the legend to European concert halls, reimagined the cursed captain as a tragic figure seeking redemption to the love of a faithful woman, a version that shaped the popular romantic image of the story for generations far removed from any ship's deck. The legend proved durable precisely because it operated on two levels at once. To sailors who genuinely feared the sea's power, it functioned as a real, practical warning about the dangers of pride and recklessness against a force far greater than any single captain's will. To audiences on land, it became something closer to Gothic entertainment, a ghost story with the added authenticity of a genuine, centuries-old maritime tradition behind it rather than pure invention. Even today, the Cape of Good Hope retains its reputation as one of the most treacherous stretches of water on Earth, and modern sailors, aware of the science behind Fata Morgana mirages, still occasionally report seeing something strange on the horizon during the specific atmospheric conditions the legend has always been associated with. Proof, if nothing else, that the conditions which likely created the myth centuries ago have never entirely gone away. The Flying Dutchman endures not because anyone today seriously believes a cursed Dutch captain sails the Cape of Good Hope for eternity, but because the legend sits at an unusually honest intersection of real danger, real psychology, and a real, still occurring atmospheric phenomenon that continues to produce ghost ships on the horizon centuries after the story was first told. Every sighting examined by modern science finds a plausible natural explanation, and yet the fear those sailors felt was never imagined. It was built from centuries of watching real ships vanish into real storms in waters that have never stopped being dangerous. Perhaps that is the real answer this legend has always pointed toward, that the sea does not need curses or ghosts to be terrifying. It only needs to be exactly what it already is.